D&D Storytime. This one's actually a current character that I'm playing. Matter of fact, his concept art is my profile picture. A super cool artist friend of mine did it for me. It's super dope, I like it. So his name is Gene, and he's a ranger with a sailing background. I used the human variant build to give him a feat at level 1. Crossbow expert. Now, my plans for Gene are a little unusual for a ranger. See, I didn't create him with the intent of having him do lots of damage at range. Like, he can still do damage, but I want him more focused on battlefield control. And here's where the unusual part comes in. I'm going to get him up to level 5, and then I'm going to multi-class into Warlock. Now, the Warlock class has some pretty interesting battlefield control spells. And there's a very certain cantrip that almost every Warlock takes that not many people look as a battlefield control option. You're right, you caught me, I'm talking about Eldritch Blast. But if you look into Xanathar's, you'll find Repelling Blast as an Eldritch invocation. And upon a hit, there's no saving throw. The enemy just gets pushed back 10 feet. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. D&D Storytime. How we made the DM walk away from the table. I had just recently gotten a really close friend of mine into D&D, and this was his first time actually at the table. And so as we, the party, started traveling through the woods, a very frazzled dwarf comes stumbling out of the woods. This catches my friend's attention, and so he goes over to talk with him. But this dwarf wasn't very friendly. Like, he wasn't combative, but he was just really rude. Did I also mention that my friend was playing a barbarian at the time? So the dwarf insults my buddy's intelligence a couple times, and my barbarian friend had had enough of it. Then the dwarf gets combative, so my buddy goes to grapple him, and also states that he's going for a rear naked choke. He then tells the dwarf that he doesn't calm down, he's going to snap his neck. The dwarf doesn't calm down. Athletics check to snap the neck. Natural frickin' 20. It's at this time that the DM looks around the table, sighs, and says, well, he was supposed to be a major plot point, now I have to go home and rewrite. Bye! Call of Cthulhu story time. Now, I've only ever had the opportunity to play Call of Cthulhu twice, but both times were freaking amazing. The first time I ever played Call of Cthulhu, I made a character that was supposed to be a private detective. I had high hopes for this character, but he kept failing his sanity rolls. Matter of fact, at one point, when the party had bedded down for the night, my character had this fever dream where a spike got drove through his chest, and at a later point, we actually found said spike. And strangely enough, this private eye was not the brightest of the bunch. So me being in character goes, nope, fuck that, I'm taking it with me. Dude, what are you doing? If I take it with me, they can't stab me with it later. And you know who never got stabbed with a spike? They called me crazy. They all said I was crazy, but guess who never got stabbed with a spike? But it didn't matter anyway, because I ended up letting myself be captured by the cultists, only to have my friends blow up the whole place with dynamite later. That was fun. D&D Storytime. The Turtle Monk. So one time a really good friend of mine that was a roommate at the time tells me that he's interested in joining our D&D group. So I, as the DM, start telling him about all the classes and races and how I'm open to people playing the extended races. So he gets to looking through the different, extended races, and he decides he's going to play a turtle. Now, there's nothing wrong with playing a turtle, but it's what he did next that really took the turn of this story. He then tells me he's going to play a monk, more specifically wear the 4 elements. I didn't think anything about it at the time, and he got one of our mutual friends to go get him a mini. So at our next D&D session, my friend comes in with his new mini, and I shit you not, this dude brings in a Happy Meal toy of Master Oogway from Kung Fu Panda. But see, what makes all this funnier is that my friend wanted to play a chaotic good monk, and every time he charged into battle, he led the front going, "Or!" D&D Storytime. The time I actually had to use physics as a DM. It was the first session of the last campaign I ran. The party started off waking up one by one in different cells. And at first they thought they were in jail. But see, in jails, they got guards and lit torches. This was not a jail. But since the party didn't have a rogue, the 2 beefcakes of the party just start ripping cell doors off and begin making their escape that way. But doing all this noise caught the attention of the first monsters they had to encounter. Skeletons! Normally this wouldn't have been a hard fight at all. But here was the thing. None of them had their starting gear. So the Goliath Barbarian of the group actually gets a great idea in his head. He then proceeds to pick up one of the cell doors, run at them full speed, uses his action to dash, and then lets go of the cell door. So now I have to factor in how tall he is to figure out how fast he's actually going and the weight of the cell door. The numbers, Mason, what do they mean? Regardless, all the skeletons were destroyed. Shh. It's a D&D story time. The stealth mission. So one time my players had to do a stealth mission for the Thieves Guild. The job was simple. All they had to do was break into a magical shop and steal some of the items in there. But at this point in the story, My players had already made good friends with the shop owner. Now, the reason the Thieves Guild is having to do this is because Wally hasn't paid for his loan, and so the Thieves Guild decides to teach him a lesson. So the party was hired. What I was not expecting was them to take the moral high ground and play both sides. So they went to this magical shop, informed Wally of everything, and asked if he could leave the store open, and for him to leave out a couple items for them to take. And the Thieves Guild was none the wiser. So they gained favor with the store owner, Wally, and the Thieves Guild. And so they got paid by the Thieves Guild, and then when they went to go return some of the items, Wally let them keep them. I reward my players for taking the moral high ground and being creative. D&D Storytime. The time I set 2 dragons after my players. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds mean. But I got like 9 to 10 players at my table at any given time during this campaign. So the players were returning from a successful mission, on their airship no less, when in the night, a young red dragon and a young red shadow dragon both attacked the ship at the same time. And this was the start of the first challenging fight my players actually had to do. Mind you, they were well equipped for this fight. Explosive arrows from Wally's? Check. All of the players at least level 9? Check. But during one of the turns, I managed to down like half the party. I even killed the ranger's animal companion, and I felt so bad. But thankfully, the wild magic sorcerer of the group, Hal, took a level in cleric, and was able to get everyone back up on their feet. It was a rough battle, but they succeeded. With the 2 rangers, the wizard, and the fighter doing some hefty damage, they managed to kill the 2 dragons. And now one of those rangers is getting a full arm tattoo to commemorate the battle. D&D Storytime. The Battle of the Big Bullshit. So there was a battle that I kind of glossed over when I was talking about some of the adventures with Conklin. So when I say there was this giant half-dragon, for reference, he was dual-wielding great axes. And one of those axes dealt cold damage, and the other fire damage. And its armor class was ridiculously high. Mind you, I believe we were all level 3 for this encounter. We basically had to crit just to hit it. So at one point in this campaign, we got trapped in a room with it. And we thought for sure that we were all about to be TPK'd. But thankfully, we got a wizard just for that one session. And oh how he changed the tide of battle. Yes, I'd like to cast Grease. Why would you cast Grease? We need to do damage to this thing.
Creature fails and is now prone.
What? So now with this creature prone, we now have advantage to hit it. We start chipping away at it, and we eventually kill it. Point of this story, never underestimate Grease. D&D Storytime. The Pork Bun Heist. So in a short campaign where I was playing a Fire Genasi fighter, our group finds out that an important NPC to the party has gotten kidnapped and conscripted into the local navy. And thus a rescue was in order. Now our group had made really good friends with most of the working class in the area, especially the bakers and the people that worked the meat market. We also had access to a wagon. So me being prior service, I thought of a plan that would get us on post without being too suspicious. And with a lot of help from the other fighter in the party, we hatched a plan. And converted the wagon into a mobile pork bun stall. Like we had no issue at all. We went through the front gate, no questions. So once we were in, we set up shop and began looking for our friend. And this too went without issue. And through silliness and MacGuffinry, we got our friend in the wagon and we beat feet out of there. We had also inadvertently revolutionized the food industry in the area. And so we rescued our friend, and made a bunch of money off of selling pork buns at the same time. D&D Storytime. The Sloppy Drunks. So one time, my group of players had figured out the Big Bad Evil Guy's lieutenant's hideout, and began prepping for an inevitable battle. 2 of my players decided that for their part of the prep, they'd go to a tavern called the Sleeping Drake Inn. Now the particular quirk of this tavern is that it has a alehouse drake named Ingle. And for whatever reason, these 2 players thought it'd be a great idea to bring along an alehouse drake. Although I did let them roll persuasion with advantage because they bribed him with alcohol and shinies. And thus the group was ready to storm the castle, so to speak. Now, for those of you that don't know what an alehouse drake does, it has a special type of breath attack. In essence, it belches in people's faces and immediately makes them intoxicated, giving them disadvantage to dexterity rolls. So, when there's a fight where the wizard keeps casting grease and the alehouse drake keeps belching in people's faces, giving them disadvantage to those dex saves, nobody stood a chance.
I did a terrible thing, and I'm not sorry.
And it's a D&D story time. So you remember that Fire Genasi fighter from the Pork Bun Heist story? This one's about him. So at one point in that campaign, our characters had gotten a little popular. And some people didn't like that. So we were all in need of some new aliases to go by. And so I, being the piece of filth that I am, went with the first thing that popped in mind.
Everyone around the table actually face-palmed when I said it.
So without further ado, that Fire Genasi fighter, whose name was Alhara, is now Wang Fire. I am so sorry, Avatar fans, but I had to. D&D Storytime. Valak the Young. As most of y'all know, I really like homebrew stuff. So when one of my players comes to me with a homebrew race he found on the internet, I live for that shit. So Valak is an Eldritch Knight Winter Elf, and since we were running a campaign out of Matt Mercer's Taldore book, I thought it'd be a cool idea if the Ashari had a forgotten tribe on the elemental plane of ice. So upon the party making contact with this forgotten tribe, Valak is taught a new homebrew spell. It essentially works the same way as Fireball, except instead of fire damage, it does cold damage. Another fun homebrew idea that I found on the internet, if any of my players roll the same initiative, their turn happens at the same time, and they can do some kind of cool synergy move. So one time during combat, Valak and Riven, the party's wizard, rolled the same initiative. So the wizard, doing what the wizard does, casts Fireball. And Valak follows it up with Ice Ball. They were trying to come up with a cool name for it, but with how my ADD brain works, in a fit of laughter, I shout from across the table, "Go Team Icy Hot!" D&D Storytime. Wally's Wondrous and Not So Wondrous Origins. So when I told my players I was going to be running them through a Taldore set campaign, a lot of my players, being huge Critical Role fans, were super excited. But I didn't want to copy and paste Critical Role. Therefore, I didn't use any of the NPCs that Matthew Mercer came up with. Like, my players could still visit places like Gilmore's Glorious Goods, but they'd never meet Gilmore. And I established this pretty early on with my players. So when the campaign was in full swing and they had already set up their base of operations at a West Run, they began asking local people about places of interest, like magical shops. It was then that they were informed about a nondescript two-story building that was run by a half-crazed middle-aged gnome. And after getting directions to this shop, they arrive, walk through the door, and are met with, "Welcome to Wally's Wondrous Not So Wondrous Items! How can I help you today?" Now, the little quirk about Wally's shop is that he only sells homebrew magical items. Some of these homebrew items are very useful. Some of them have certain quirks about them. But that's also what made Wally a memorable, special NPC. D&D Storytime. The Botched Break-In. So in another adventure where I was still playing Conklin Bronzebeard, our party made a pit stop in Waterdeep. Waterdeep being a huge city, Conklin was pickpocketed 3 times. Conklin was tired of this, and actually caught the very next person that tried to pickpocket him. So he punches the would-be thief in the chest, knocking him to the ground, and he asks the sorcerer if he could cast thaumaturgy real quick. And it's there that Conklin decides it'd be a great idea to announce if anyone else tries to pickpocket him, he's going to hang them by their boots at the nearest post. Later that evening, the party decides to bed down for the night at a local inn. But before bed, Conklin swung by the general store, and there he bought 50 feet of rope and a little something special for anyone dumb enough to break into his room. And of course, in the middle of the night, someone did try to break into his room. Unfortunately, they did not see the trap that Conklin had set up just inside the doorway. So when the bear trap fell on top of the robber's head and Conklin grabbed the rope that it was connected to, dragging him back in the room, it was made clear never to fuck with Conklin. D&D Storytime. The Story of Bob. So in the Battle of the Gods campaign, it was kind of a common theme that we'd get tossed into a different plane of existence. One such time, the fighter and the Dragonborn sorcerer end up getting separated from the rest of us, and they ended up on a beach somewhere with no real identifiable features, except for a stone tablet. The tablet described an underwater kingdom. So while they're trying to figure out how to get down there, one of them actually touches the tablet. And the DM begins to describe as the ocean begins to bubble and toss and turn, springing up from the water was a giant squid. Oh god, oh god, oh! Just the portion sticking out of the body of water was described as being about 80 feet tall. The 2 party members make ready to at least fight to get away. But then it speaks. "Hello, my name is Bob." What? Bob was an intelligent squid, and his sole purpose for existing was to transport people that give him shinies. And to this day, Bob holds a special place in my heart.